Everybody cool? Everybody know Don? Don Randi.
This is Matt Starr.
I told Don I got a text a couple weeks ago. Would you like to interview Don Randi? I said, are you sure you're the right person? I've been waiting my whole life to have this conversation, so it's an honor to be here chatting with you. So, you played on so many legendary recordings, so many influential recordings. I'm curious, did you get good at realizing when you were in the session, oh, this is something special, this is going to be a thing?
The first time I heard a song, I was in my car, and I can just show you something. That was my part. Leon Russell's part was this. Al DeLore's part was a #1 record called Da Do Run Run. But I didn't know it till I was in the car, and I said, my God, I played on that record. I wish I could say I was the only piano player, but Phil used 4, sometimes 5 piano players.
And all you guys playing at the same time?
Yeah, different.
Yeah. So 4 pianos in the room.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And so when you were coming up, when you discovered the piano, what were you listening to? Do you remember the moment where you're like, that's a cool sound, I want to do that thing?
Well, I started playing piano when I was 5.5 years old. My father had a restaurant in the Catskill Mountains, and all the acts that worked in the Catskill Mountains were booked out of the back of that restaurant. It looked like a bookmaker joint. There were all the telephones, and I hear them rehearsing with a wonderful upright piano. And I'd go back there and I'd pick around, and I would hear certain things, mostly pop music, no jazz whatsoever, no rock and roll whatsoever. And then when I came to California, much older, I went to work for California record distributors, and all they had was jazz records. And I listened to that all day long and started to play jazz. And then Phil Spector came into the club called Sherry's, Sunset and Crescent Heights, and heard me play. And the next thing I know, the next day I got a call, would you like to do a recording session? From Steve Douglas, great saxophone player. And that's how it all started.
Prior to that, had you been in the recording studio?
Never.
And so how was that being produced, that idea of having somebody else direct you or kind of suggest what you're going to play?
I had no idea. I was in heaven, just to be with all those great musicians. Some of those guitar players were some of the greatest jazz guitar players. Barney Kessel, Tommy Tedesco, Howard Roberts, Billy Pittman. These guys were making a living playing rock and roll. I don't think they liked it very much, but it was a living.
Right. So that was, things were changing at that point.
That's right.
And were you guys always working off of charts? Was there conversations about, hey, can you change that thing? Like how specific was it?
That's an interesting question. For the simple reason is we played on 21 records in a row for Phil Spector. Every one of them sold 1 million records. In between, other producers would say, we better get those guys because they're making the hit records. And it opened a door for me that was, it would have never been open if not for Phil. I mean, he was a maniac in the studio and not the easiest guy to work for, but he did get the product done and he did get #1 records. So if you were a producer working for Capitol Records or Warner Brothers or for a major company, you were on a budget. You had to get 4 songs in 3 hours, and you had to get the guys that could give you 4 songs in 3 hours. And we were capable of doing that. And that's why they would hire us. With Phil and Brian Wilson, they didn't care. They just let it go because they were independent. They didn't have to worry about having to bring in 4 songs in 3 hours.
And I kind of equate that to being the first man on the moon. It's like, well, we also want to go to the moon. Well, who's been there? Oh,
Yeah,
Don's been there.
yeah.
Well, let's get Don. He did great, right? So like once you're
Sure.
in that loop, and so were you doing 3 sessions a day? Like what was a day like for you?
Sometimes 3 and 4 sessions a day. 1 week, I did 26 different recording sessions, and I arranged 4 of those sessions. So I never slept. I was never home. I was in and out of. I remember my wife and I getting in an argument over the kids, you know. And I said, "Well, why didn't you do that?" And she just looked at me. She says, "Well, where the hell were you?" You know, I was never home. And that's when I started to realize I better wait a second here. You know. But you had to take it because that was your living. That's how you could support a family. That's how it went. And you had to take those calls. And some of it, can you imagine one day going in the studio with the Lovin' Spoonful and hearing some incredible classical, wonderful stuff, and the next day after that, the same studio, it actually was the same studio we did all the Beach Boys sessions at United Western. It's now East West. That same studio, we did a lady by the name of Mrs. Miller. Does anybody remember Mrs. Miller? She had one of the worst voices you've ever heard, but Johnny Carson loved her, and he would have her on the show all the time with an orchestra. And she sold 1 million records. So how are you, you're going from one thing, and then 2 days later, we're back in doing a song, some unknown song called God Only Knows. How about that?
Yeah.
And now the Beach Boys. So you're going, but we were able to do that, you know.
What were you talk about God Only Knows off of Pet Sounds. What were your first initial impressions of Brian?
Genius.
Out of the gate.
Out of the gate.
Okay.
Brian knew what he was doing. He was the only one many times that he was hearing all that wonderful vocal stuff in his ears. We would be playing something. I'll tell you a quick, great story. On Good Vibrations, there's a part that it keeps on and then it's over. And that's all I'm playing. But I'm playing it with my foot on a Hammond B organ, holding the note down. Now, we had already been there 9 hours. And I'm like this. He says to the guys, Hal, Blaine, guys, take a break. I just need Don. He can't see me because there's baffles in front of me. I'm still playing that same note. He says, Don, I need you to stay on that same note. Don't change. And I'm like this. I can't keep my eyes open. He says, keep doing it, keep doing it. I'm the only one in the studio. And he says, Don, keep doing it. He says, just a second. So I stop. And as I stop, I look over and there's a pillow. So I grab the pillow and I lay it on the foot pedal. And I lay down and put my head on the foot pillow. Now I'm back. And I fell asleep. For 10 minutes I was out. And the next thing I hear was click, click. Don, thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. Now, Brian never knew that story till Hal Blaine told him about 5 years ago. And I get a call from Brian. He says, did you really do that? I said, you goddamn right I did. I was fast asleep. True story.
Can you hear snoring in the track if you listen with headphones on a remix?
But, you know, you do what you got to do. What can I say? Incidentally, we were in for Good Vibrations 3.5 months it took to do that one song.
And is that the point where he started doing that modular recording where you do a section, which is very much you guys on Pro Tools, you know, that's very common now, but at the time I'm imagining it was.
That's a great, I mean, first we had 1 track, then we had 2 track, and then it went to 4 track, and Brian would ping pong. He'd take 1 track, put it to the next track, combine those 2 tracks, put it to the next track, I remember Tommy Tedesco saying, when it went to 8-track after that, he said, what are they going to do with all those tracks? They found what to do. And it kept going on till 24-track came in. And now, no more tracks.
Yeah, endless. And we had producer Sylvia Massey here yesterday, and she talked about starting with a 4-track and all that. Can you speak about working within limitations? So we've only got 4 tracks, so you have to make decisions rather than, oh, let's just play 20 things, we'll decide later.
Yeah, sometimes that would happen. But you got to remember, you got to go back even before that. It was mono. How did they get all that music on that little piece of 1/4-inch tape? And they did. With Phil Spector, that whole band was in one room, playing at the same time. And sometimes the vocals would even sing, doing like a rough track. As a matter of fact, the Blossoms, who did most of Phil Spector, Fanita James, passed away a couple of weeks ago. What an incredible voice. Absolutely incredible. And I happened to be invited to her memorial, and there was over 1,000 people there to hear a backup singer and to celebrate her funeral. And I heard some of the greatest gospel music I have ever heard in my life 2 weeks ago. No piano, no organ, everybody sang a cappella, from 12 voices to 20 voices to one voice. You'd hear one note, and that was it. And they went for it. Wonderful.
How was the experience of, because in those days you do a session, and how shortly after might you hear that on the radio?
Within weeks in those days, because they could get a record out that fast. There was vinyl, which is now it started all over again. Everything is back to vinyl. But they could get it done pretty quickly, especially the 45s. They were out immediately. People loved singles in those days.
And so, certainly for the mix engineers and the producers, they could do a session and then hear it on the radio and go, oh, you know what, actually, we could. So how did that inform your playing, where you go, oh, that thing I was doing, or the way I was doing it?
I'll tell you an interesting thing that a number of the producers would do is they'd finish the track. They'd get a copy of it on a cassette. They'd run out to their car, listen to it on the car radio. If it was happening on the car radio, they knew the mix was there. And sometimes when you'd get that was done. Television in those days would play a lot of those songs, but for TV, to get it to sound like a record, if they knew what they were doing, they would boost the bass tracks. Otherwise, you wouldn't hear the bass.
Compensate for the...
Because of television, you know. So it was an interesting time.
And I was going to ask you about what was your motivation for opening the Baked Potato. Everybody familiar with the Baked Potato?
Yeah.
Was that in 70?
Yes, 1970.
Okay. And then I didn't know your dad owned a place in the Catskills, so that's in your blood to have an establishment, right?
Yes, yeah. I knew a little bit about it, but I got tired of club owners. I always played live. I'd finish a session and I'd end up in a nightclub because I enjoyed having an audience. I enjoyed letting out my frustrations a lot of times. Sometimes when you're doing this all day long. You know, and make a hit record, but that's not what I can do, you know. I want to be able to experiment. So you can't do that on a rock and roll date. You're in. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, that's one genre. How many times I had been asked, this is one that you have to get over with. I've been asked to sound like probably every piano player you've ever heard. And I have. Could you do it like Floyd Kramer? Could you do it more like Ray Charles? And you don't get embarrassed by that. The problem was most of the producers did not know how to verbalize that. They didn't. They were afraid to say, "Could you make it a little more black, or could you do it a little more like this?" And this is what we went through because most of the producers were not musicians. They were A&R men, which was art and repertoire. They knew how to pick songs, but they didn't know how to verbalize. Jimmy Bowen was a perfect example of that. Got many, many hit records for Warner Brothers Reprise. So many of the guys that worked at Columbia, they were corporate guys, but they know how to pick songs. Very important part of the whole system. Interesting.
So you start the baked potato because part of you just goes, man, I just want to go somewhere and jam.
Okay,
like
that's
after
it.
work. Like, so why don't I just build my own place?
But not only for me, for all the guys. They all ended up working there. Mike Melvoin, a great piano player, doing sessions, he played there 3 years in a row every Monday night, and he had a different rhythm section every Monday for 3 years. I think he repeated twice. And he was marvelous. I used to run down there to see who was going to be with him. So many different great musicians. Lee Ritenour started there. Larry Carlton, Joe Sample, Al Jarreau. This was a place where they could do whatever they wanted. Nobody ever told them what to play, how to play, and sometimes it got very loud in there, but not generally. It always was a good level of sound, and we always had good equipment. Always had the best equipment to play through. And for years, I had a wonderful Steinway B concert grand that was MIDI. They put a Forte MIDI mod in it, and it could trigger synthesizers. We had the first one of those. So guys would come in, and they were a little afraid of it, but once they got used to it, they loved it because you still had a great action. This piano I'm playing has a great action. It's a Dexabel. It's relatively new. They've been out about 3 or 4 years, and it's a marvelous piano. They have a whole bunch of them. The actions are very like a real piano. That's why I enjoy playing it.
So, if you guys haven't been to the baked potato, or we call it the Spud, that's the cats that play there, it's a musician-focused venue, right? So the whole place is centered around the stage. It always sounds great in there. The caliber, if you're going in there, you're going to get a certain caliber of musician. Could be jazz, could be a fusion thing, could be like a rock thing, but it's always great. So I'm just telling you guys, go. And my buddy John Mader, drummer, is playing there tonight. So, maybe you peel out of here at like 6 and go up there.
Great guitar player with him too.
Yes.
Carl Verheyen.
Yes. Yeah, but we, as musicians, we of course appreciate a room like that, but the audience knows too.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
And what's fun for the baked potato is now all the kids of all these great musicians are playing there, and they're equally as good, and the ideas are wonderful. I mean, some fantastic new young musicians are taking over.
Yeah, and it's just one of those places where you can, the other thing is, say Steve Ferrone's playing drums or Luca Thur's playing guitar. When he's done, he's going to walk right by you, and he's going to go stand out in the back lounge, and you can go talk to him. You know what I mean? So I think for musicians to be able to network and hang, ask questions, even just shake a hand and say, thank you so much. It's a great thing that you've created. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for starting
thank you.
that.
My pleasure. I enjoy it as much as anybody.
Right. Yeah, well, it was born out of a need,
Yeah, sure.
A real need. So this might be a hard question to answer, but if you had to pick one song that you're most proud of, what would that be?
Oh boy.
And you can answer it differently tomorrow too. So we're not holding you to it.
I think out of all the songs, You've Lost That Lovin' Feeling, it would be right at the top. Sound of a Different Drum with Linda Ronstadt would be at the top. There was a group called Spiral Staircase I love you more today than yesterday. What a great song that was. And it gets lost in it. But one of my favorite albums of all time, besides Pet Sounds, is the Christmas album Phil Spector did. That Christmas album is unbelievable. I can listen to that over and over and never get tired of it. And he never had to record anything else. Had he just done that, what an annuity, to have something, wow, look, it's December again, let's count that money. And every year it does the same thing.
Were you present when he was recording that spoken piece at the end? Because I heard there were other versions that went on and on and on and on and on.
Just for part of it, and I left.
You're like, all right, I'm going to go get lunch. I'll be back.
Yeah.
Is there a track that when you hear it, you still go, I wish I had played this instead of that little line?
Well, not really. I'll tell you, on God Only Knows. It's a centerpiece of God Only Knows. And Brian and I argued over that. I mean, literally yelling at one another. And he had it. He had it very broad, and it wasn't working. And it was getting to him because we had been doing it over and over. And I said, do it short. And he said, no, that's not. And we went back and I said, Brian, try it one time. And it took me about a half hour going back and forth. And finally he tried it, and that's the way it ended up. But there's some things you just feel and know would be better. So I stuck with it, and he ended up using it.
Well, thank you, because it's a nice contrast to the rest of the song, which is so lush, and then
Yes,
it gets
it
that
is.
staccato. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. Are you okay if we take some questions from these
Sure,
wonderful
sure.
people? Anyone have a question they'd like to ask? Yes, Paula.
Last time you saw Brian?
When was the last time I saw Brian? About a year ago. And he hasn't been coming out too much. He's not feeling that great. I saw they did a documentary with him where he's in the car. I don't know if you saw that, constantly. I didn't care for it. It didn't make him look that good. It made him look like an older, sick person, and they didn't need to do that,
Another question? Don't be shy. See, here's the thing. We do this, everyone's like, I'm afraid to say something stupid. And then afterwards, they're going to come up and ask you 1,000 questions because they're not on the microphone.
Well, they did already.
Yeah, right. All right. Yes. This is, what's your name? Sarah.
Hi. I was wondering if you're always still learning to this day? You're always seeking new knowledge?
Say that again?
Are you always seeking new knowledge and continuing your growth and learning?
Every time I sit down and play, or you hear a new song, that's the freedom of jazz. You're rewriting constantly. It's the first chorus is a nice chorus, but the second chorus is even nicer, or the third chorus. You keep growing on what you've done. Incidentally, you know what a composer does when he dies? He decomposes. That's right.
Ba-dum. Awesome. Is there a record or a few from your childhood or just over the years that you find yourself listening to, once or twice a year? You keep going back to it and just revisit that record, and it just gives you a feeling.
Well, I love Be My Baby. And these boots are made for walking, because I was with Nancy Sinatra to this very day. I was a musical director for almost 30 years. After Billy Strange retired, I took over, and we still do shows, and we're trying to talk her into doing one in April. Maybe she'll come out. You know something? 2 months ago, Taylor Swift had the #1 record in London. The #2 record was the re-release on Light in the Attic of Nancy's record, Nancy and Lee, on vinyl, all over again. So it's kind of getting her excited about maybe starting to work again.
Oh, Oh, that's excellent. That would be great.
Oh, yeah.
That would be great. And Be My Baby was our wedding song.
Was it?
And they blasted it through the church. As a kid, I'd go to this church. The whole wall was speakers. I'm like, I want to play some rock and roll through those. Anyway, we did.
Yeah.
So after we got married, he said, I do boom, boom,
Boom,
boom.
boom.
Yeah, it was beautiful. So thank you. Nice job on that track.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Any other questions? Yes.
What are you working on now?
What I'm working on right now, I can't tell you. How about that? It's going to be a surprise album. It'll be out about 2.5 months.
Awesome. Yes, sir. Come on up. I don't want to put the mic in front of the speaker here, so I am a drummer, but I know that's typically not a good idea. Come on up. Yeah, see, here, just pass it over quick.
Hi, my name is Shiva and I'm a drummer. I just joined the union, Local 47. Do you have any advice for me on how to get union gigs and be active within the union?
Yeah, I can tell you a big clue. Many of the gigs won't be union, but what you have to do is ask your employer, if you're not going to play union date, at least file the contract. You can pay me what you want, but I want health and welfare and pension paid on the union contract, so that when you become my age, you have a nice pension. Because if you don't do that, it's up yours. You get nothing. But not only that, residuals, if something that you've recorded plays on television or in a film, you have to be paid for that because you have a union contract. May have not got the scale originally, but if a movie company does it and they have to pay it because there's a contract, they will pay it. I call that mailbox money. It's nice to go to that little mailbox. I don't care if it's 50 cents. It's something we would have gotten. And incidentally, Phil Spector and Brian Wilson were the first guys that put our names on the back of the records and also filed union contracts and caused all the majors. They were getting away with murder before that. Some of them did, some of them didn't. And that made everybody get in line and start to give us credit for it and file union contracts. Elvis Presley, on a film called, I forget the name of the film, but the song was A Little Less Conversation. There was no song. We made it up. We took a break. The producer said they needed one more song. Some of those Elvis Presley movies have the worst songs you've ever heard, but some of them are pretty good. We took an hour and figured out A Little Less Conversation. The initial pay on that is way back in, I guess, in the 60s, was $162. Because it was a union contract, over the years that has been used and reused over 100 times, and we all the musicians that were on that, which was Glenn Campbell, myself, Hal Blaine, Joe Osborne, Tommy Tedesco, and a couple other people, it's close to $10,000 over the years, over 30 years' time, that we would never have gotten unless there was a contract. Kind of nice.
That's some good advice right there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Should we
And good luck. I like your bag.
Nice. Has everyone seen the Wrecking Crew movie? Yeah, if you haven't, go see it. It's a great
There's
story.
another one out now, what is it called?
Immediate Family.
Immediate Family.
Yeah.
I think they're showing it here today someplace.
Yeah, because there's all these, the fact that I didn't realize that, but the fact that Phil and Brian are putting your names on the records.
Sure.
How important that is, and just
It was,
to
it,
be.
it was so important because how would you know? Dick Clark was the first one. I remember watching a Dick Clark one afternoon, and he actually mentioned that finally these guys are getting recognition because can you imagine Dino, Desi, and Billy? They were three little pishers. They were this big. They couldn't play anything. Although later on, Billy Hanchy from the band ended up playing drums with a lot of different bands, including the Beach Boys. But they couldn't play a note. But they got 3 million selling records. Lee Hazelwood. But it was all the Wrecking Crew guys.
Would you like to play a little bit?
Sure.
I'll stop talking. I'm gonna.
We could talk for 3 days.
Yeah, absolutely.